Hello and welcome to Workforce Wisdom. I'm your host, Christy Bray, Chief Customer Officer at PracticeLink. This podcast explores the latest trends in healthcare recruitment, highlighting innovative strategies, success stories, and fresh perspectives that are transforming the healthcare workforce. These episodes will lead to in-depth, thoughtful discussions with recognized industry-leading healthcare professionals, exploring the challenges of healthcare recruitment and beyond. Whether you're an experienced recruitment professional or just starting out, this podcast aims to help you discover how experts are reshaping the industry, leveraging technology, and fostering inclusive hiring practices. Today's episode, Workforce Wisdom, How Education Access Drives Workforce Strategy and Retention. Today's guest, Dr. Constance St. Germain, has served as president of Capella University since 2023. Following a steady progression through the institution's leadership ranks, she joined Capella in 2017 as Chief Academic Officer and Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs before assuming the presidency. During her distinguished career in higher education, Dr. St. Germain has held progressively senior roles at both American Public University System and the University of Phoenix. Her experience spans the academic spectrum from faculty member to program director, dean, and ultimately executive dean. In these positions, she championed academic excellence and innovation while maintaining rigorous accreditation standards and fostering student success. Before her career in academia, Dr. St. Germain served as a major in the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. Dr. St. Germain's educational background includes a Doctor of Education in Higher Education and Organizational Change from Benedictine University. She has a JD from the University of Baltimore School of Law and a Bachelor of Arts from George Mason University. Welcome, Constance. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me today, Christy. I'm super excited to be here.
So we're going to start a little bit and dig into, a lot of your work at Capella University, really understanding the work that you're doing there and then how our audience can learn from that, from higher education and then within the greater workforce development process. So Capella's mission is to expand access to high quality education for adult learners seeking professional growth. How is that mission influenced by your leadership priorities since you've become president?
I would say I would do a couple things when I'm thinking about this question. One, I would say, obviously you mentioned I was a chief academic officer for a long time. So I've always been really focused on access for students because the traditional student doesn't really exist anymore. When we think about traditional students, right, historically, we've always thought 18 to 24, the parents are funding them going to college, they're living on campus, they're doing all those kind of things. But the traditional student now, as we're in 2026, and it has been for several years, it's much older. People are either delaying school or they're having to pay for it themselves, so they can't go full time. They're working. So we see a lot of adult students now coming here, and it's across higher education. And one of the things that we've always been very focused on at Capella has really been around access, making education accessible to people so that it fits in with their lives and that they can manage it, right? They can have work life, home life, and education at the same time, and they can be successful in it. So that's one of the things I've been very focused on. The other thing I've been very focused on has really been around academic quality, making sure that the education that we are providing is directly aligned to what employers are looking for, either within the profession, if there's a programmatic accreditor tied to it, or if it is something specific to that field. But we have advisory boards that we work with where we have leaders of industry who come and sit with us and tell us this is what we're looking for, or this is a major gap that we're seeing. And that helps us inform our curriculum, especially around competency-based, because we want people that are coming to Capella to be able to take what they learn and immediately apply it. And then I'd say the last thing that has really been part of my focus as being president has been around innovation. And you can't have innovation just for innovation's sake. It really needs to be tied to faculty and student success. because at the end of the day, our reputation is directly tied to our students. They're going out there into the workforce, they're representing Capella. We work with employers and we want to make sure that we have a great reputation, but that students are learning, that they can see the latest technology. AI is a great thing right now. And there's been a lot of talk, whether you're in the workforce or you're in higher education, there's been a lot of talk around what does it mean to be innovative in an age of AI. And I would say for us, looking at how do we take innovation and make people successful and help them learn smarter, really meet them where they're at, has been a big focus. So those three things: access, really meeting people where they're at, academic rigor, and innovation.
Yeah. And I know we'll touch on several of those things throughout today's episode. I think as somebody who was an adult learner, I did the traditional path, as you said, that 18 to 22 or whatever it was, 24. But when I went back to do my master's, it was many, many years later in an online format. At the time, that was intimidating, I will say. But I just appreciate all those things you said. Probably the key thing for me is that focus on meeting with what the industries need that you're serving, because you could be educating people all day long. If it's not what we need to sustain whatever workforce in whatever industry, probably not serving your mission very well. So before Capella, you held multiple leadership roles in higher ed and in the military. How have those experiences shaped your approach to aligning education with the workforce needs, as we mentioned?
It's really influenced me because one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that anything that we do around learning, it only matters if it translates into real capability. So everything that we're doing, that we're teaching within the course room, students should be able to take that and immediately apply it. And in real life situations, shouldn't be theoretical. Maybe if this happens, you should be able to you should have real world scenarios that you're taking and you're applying your learning to, and you should be able to go into the office and translate that. And I love it when I run into students who tell me, oh, this course was so great because actually we're working on strategy right now at my company, and I'm taking a class in strategy, for example, like in our MBA, and I was able to take some of that and immediately apply it. Or I realized, oh, this is what my professor was talking about in XYZ, and they are able to make that connection. So that's the big thing I took away from the military. Everything that you're doing when you're training day in, day out, you should be able to apply it in a real world situation. And the same is true with higher education. So feel really strongly about that. And I also think that, especially since Capella is competency-based, unlike a lot of traditional schools, everything that we're doing has real world applications. So we make our students take what they're learning and apply it to a real world scenario. Sometimes they can go and actually use things that are going on in their office and bring it back into the course room and demonstrate that application of it. And having those types of measurable outcomes for our students to say, yes, I took what I learned, I applied it, and then our faculty go ahead and they assess based on that. I think that is what's really showing our academic rigor and helps our students move forward. So that was the takeaway I had from being in the military.
Yeah. And I think the value to those organizations that make that investment in their employees, it's more than, right? Like you get that exponential boost of having that type of learning and that competency-based project work. In many organizations, recruiting and retaining talent is heavily tied to those advancement opportunities. How can that access to higher education programs like Capella help employers build stronger internal pipelines? This is always a struggle. As I worked in hospitals, we have all these people. Like, how can you grow your own?
Well, we did a survey last year. It's called the Healthcare Workforce Survey, where we looked at that, particularly as it relates to healthcare and what's going on, because we know across the United States right now, as we're projecting forward beyond 2030, that there's going to be a huge healthcare shortage. I think it's like 700,000 people. And we were trying to figure out, like, what is going on? Why is there this huge shortage? And a lot of things that we found out from the survey is, one, people don't feel valued in their jobs right now. So 8 out of 10 of those who were surveyed really said that they don't feel that their employer was valuing them. They were burned out. And, healthcare is a very hard field. It's very rigorous, requires a lot of empathy, a lot of care, and it's just draining to people, especially coming out of COVID. We saw that in particular. And so one of the things that the survey showed us was that people were looking for opportunities, especially among Gen Z and millennial. So over 60% of the younger generation said, hey, if I had a pathway forward and my employer invested in my training and in my education, I would be more inclined to stay, which was interesting because the survey found that over 55% of those surveyed at any given time were looking for a new job. So over half of them were looking at the help wanted ads, right? There wasn't a lot of loyalty there. And employers are saying, well, I don't understand. Why do we have this high turnover? Why do we have this high turnover? Why is there no loyalty? Why aren't people staying? And one of the major things they can do is actually to invest in their employees by offering those types of educational benefits. So that, I think, is a key thing in looking about retaining people, because we know how expensive it is to go to market to find somebody, bring them on, all of that. And so you want to bring people and inspire that loyalty and have them stay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way you said that there about the investment on going to hire someone else, I would also say that if it's a compensation piece and your compensation has fallen behind, you have to think what it will cost to replace that person as well. Because if they're looking for $1 or $2 and you're unwilling to bend in the compensation band or whatever. So it's kind of twofold, right? The investment in the training and education, and equally like pay them for that, pay them for those skills that they've learned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you bring up a good point too. So if you go to market for somebody, you're obviously going to pay more than if you keep somebody internally and you just promote them up the ranks, right? So it's a win-win because the employees feeling valued, they're feeling upward mobility, they feel like they actually can see themselves there for a long time. They have that loyalty within the organization, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to go there and now you're going to be competing with all the other employers to hire key talent. So yes.
Yeah. I know we talked about adult learners at the beginning. These folks are balancing a lot: work, life, education, all of this is happening simultaneously. What insights can you share about designing programs that support both learner success and the employer workforce needs?
So that's one of the things I feel very passionately about here at the university, and I think we actually do a great job with it, is really partnering with key industry leaders to understand what's going on. The people who are embedded in those industries day in, day out, what they're seeing, what the gaps are. I think sometimes there's a disconnect between higher education and the workforce. And so higher education operates in its own bubble. Historically, it has. And it thinks, well, this is what we think people should know. But then we're graduating people who then go out into the workforce, and the employer's like, they don't know what I need them to know coming into this field. And that's where that partnership between industry and higher education is absolutely critical. We have leaders come in, we have these meetings, these advisory boards where they look at our curriculum, they share with us, these are the gaps that we're seeing. And having that two-way dialogue helps us when we're thinking about new program offerings, helps us design our programs around it, helps us fill those gaps that employers might be seeing within the curriculum that we're offering, to make sure that our students, as I mentioned earlier, like my experience from the military, right, can put that into play immediately as they're going through their course. So being able to have that connection, I think, is very, very important.
How often are you guys doing or working with employers in terms of internships or that on-the-job skill set? What we would find in a hospital market that I served in New Mexico, we would get qualified nurse practitioners, but until they were in certain clinical setting, either in the hospital, just, a specific hospital department, there was a lot of gap, almost a year's worth of what we felt needed some precepting and some one-on-one time. How do you close that gap? Is it through an internship or something else where you can help that person be more employable quicker?
Well, we do it in a couple different ways based on the profession. So obviously some professions like mental and behavioral health, those professions already require significant amount of practicum time. So we have an entire site-based learning team that helps work with those students to make sure that they're collecting their practicum hours because they have to be licensed by their state. So we do that and they go through those practicum hours. We track them. We help them pull everything together to do that. So nursing, we do something similar. And in our RN to BSN program, we have a practicum experience now. And our students, we help them find those areas. Now, the great thing about that is a lot of people, since they're already employed in their area and they're already RNs, it makes it easier for us for them to do their practicum and have that preceptor experience at the hospital that they're already working at. And there are a lot of hospitals who come to us and say, this is what we'd like to do. And it makes it a lot easier, right? So whether they're looking at training their RNs to get their BSNs and creating that partnership with us, I also think it makes students more successful because then they are going back to school with other fellow nurses at that time. And so they have this already kind of built-in support system, and then they're learning on the job. So those are how we do it within healthcare and within mental and behavioral health. And then like in the business area and IT area, we actually work with different partners where we have a program where we bring in corporations, businesses who are trying to solve problems. And they work together, the students come together and they work in that area to help that organization solve whatever issue that they're having as part of their learning within a course. So that's great too, that type of experiential learning, because they can make that connection there. So those are different ways that we kind of address it based upon the discipline itself.
So from your perspective, what are the biggest drivers for turnover in today's healthcare workforce, particularly among the early and mid-career professionals?
We mentioned this just briefly earlier, but I think burnout, I think not seeing a path forward, not feeling that their employer is invested in them were all things that we found in that healthcare workforce survey. And it's particularly true among the younger, the Gen Z. They really feel that education is their path forward, which seems a little bit counterintuitive when you're hearing things externally about the value of education. But I think these younger generation, they want to continue to learn. So they're very interested in learning new things, making themselves better, adding value to an organization. So how do you really get those benefits out there and encourage people to take advantage of it? There's nothing sadder than seeing a benefit that's not being taken advantage of, and especially one that's a win-win for an organization where the employee is retained, right? They're skilled up, they have more mobility within their career, and the employer itself is getting a better skilled employee, and they don't have to go look for someone to replace them. So to me, that is, I think, the biggest disconnect right now between those who are offering the benefit and the awareness, and closing that gap as well.
Do you find that those programs, are they advanced enough? Do they provide enough resource, number one? And is it difficult? Is the application process difficult? Those that have the programs that have been successful, are there some keys that they're doing right?
Well, we have a lot of tuition aligned pricing where we work with different employers to meet the threshold, like the 5250 threshold that they can invest in each employee. I would say probably the ones that are most successful in those areas are one where the employee doesn't have to pay anything out of pocket. So the employer is directly billing the institution, because as I mentioned earlier, so many people are going back to school, they're working adults, right? They have their own financial obligations that they have to meet. Pay their rent, pay their mortgage, support their children, doing all that. And they don't have a lot of expendable cash for them to be investing going back to school. A lot of them also already have student loans on top of that. So anything that they don't have to pay out of pocket and is billed directly to an institution is very beneficial. And that's where we've seen a lot of success as well, where people taking advantage of it because they know that their employers got their back and they don't have to worry about that tuition bill coming through because their organization is paying it.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do think the finance of it is what holds a lot of people back from any form of higher education, just figuring out how to pay for it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think then what happens ultimately is people become frustrated because, especially if they already have student loans and they're working and they're trying to balance their life with all of that, they know they need to go on and get more education. So whether it's getting your RN to BSN or maybe for your BSN to your MSN, right? Or you're like, oh, I want to become a nurse practitioner in that area, then they never really make that leap. And then they feel stuck. And it creates this vicious cycle of, okay, I'm going to go look for a job. I don't feel like I'm being invested in. My employer doesn't care about me. And they're really not doing anything to support me bettering myself. So it's just this cycle that gets in, which can be easy to break as long as employers realize that. And I actually think the healthcare does a great job of that, like recognizing like we need to keep upskilling, and maybe because they're facing such a critical shortage, they're more aware of it. And so they're getting ahead of it compared to a lot of industries.
Yeah, that's good to hear for healthcare. Just that's where my heart is. So that's very good to hear. We've talked about that struggle really to recruit talent with the right blend of skills and readiness. You've mentioned some of the work that you do to develop those partnerships with employers, but maybe give us a couple of examples of how Capella is helping close that gap, or maybe some key skills that you guys have found that said, oh, we didn't know. Now we can provide that education. Maybe you had to make an adjustment to a curriculum.
One of the things that we've done is we had an organization who reached out to us who asked us to partner with them around creating a degree program because they realized, oh my gosh, we don't have enough people coming out of the pipeline. So they saw the university as a talent pipeline facilitator for them. So they had people that wanted to go back, and they said, we can send people there, but then we can also facilitate people here. And we're going to close that gap, but we're going to offer them sites where they can actually do a practicum at too. So they're getting on the job training and they're being trained how we want them to be trained, which I also think is a key issue. And so with that, we took a whole program through where we developed with them in partnership with them and launched it. And it's been great. They've been sending people that are interested in the program to us. We've also had external people come in and do that. And then we've been able to use their sites around the country for those that need it to get their practicum experience. So it's been very, very nice to have that done. And we want to keep doing that. So whether it's in the nursing profession or other healthcare professions in that area, that's something that we look to address. And one of the things that Capella does really well is our speed to market. So we really do pride ourselves on innovation and flexibility, especially around our competency-based model. And we actually offer two forms of competency-based education, and most people don't understand the difference. So one is a very traditional model. So think of like a 10-week course where it's much more guided and facilitated instruction. And then the other one is called direct assessment, and that's our FlexPath model. And that is really untethered from the traditional credit hour. So it allows people to move as fast or slow as they need through the course. And where this really comes into play is in healthcare. So think about an RN coming through who already has a lot of knowledge and is working in the field. They can move much faster through in completing their degree program in that because they're coming in with that requisite knowledge, maybe statistics, for example, where you're like, maybe I need to go a little bit slower in this course. And they have that flexibility to do that. And so that's where our FlexPath model really comes in beneficial to people who are already in the field.
I will say statistics is the reason I have my MHA and not my MBA.
Statistics strikes fear into the hearts of everyone, Christy, if that makes you feel any better.
That was a very clear decision I made.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Did you know PracticeLink, the nation's most trusted physician recruitment resource, now offers PracticeLink Pro Marketing? PracticeLink Pro Marketing is a brand new, powerful recruitment sourcing solution built just for healthcare organizations. With custom strategies, targeted reach, and data-driven results, PracticeLink Pro Marketing helps you attract top-tier candidates and fill hard-to-reach roles faster. Ready to elevate your recruitment game? Visit PracticeLink.com and schedule your free consultation today.
So beyond the degree completion, there are other outcomes that our audience, these recruiters and HR leaders, really should focus on when they're evaluating the impact of a continuing education program, in the long run, they're hoping to retain, right? And then they're hoping to, like you said, improve performance or elevate these folks from a job satisfaction. But what really should our listeners be looking for as that impact?
Well, so I think the first thing you already mentioned, right? The workforce outcomes. I think that is a really big thing. I think that as an HR professional and organization, when they're looking at workforce outcomes, you need to say, how many people are taking advantage of this? We're offering this benefit. How many people are taking advantage of it? And then what is it doing for promotion and mobility rates within the organization? Do we see people that go and complete this degree or complete this certificate? Are they moving up to the next level? Are they making more pay, for example? People are very interested in doing that. So that workforce development, I think, is really big. The second one is around performance indicators. So do you see that people are actually performing better? And you can look at their annual performance evaluations from their supervisors. How is that working with them? Are they getting it? Are they demonstrating proficiency in their skill gains? Maybe they need a little less help in some areas. They're performing actually above where they were performing before and doing that. And just any measurable, I would say, improvements related to their job performance. And then the last one, when we're looking at, really has to come around business impact and cost efficiency. So are you having to go to a market? Are you retaining the good employees that you have? I mean, nothing's worse than a regrettable loss. When you have an employee, a high performing employee, somebody that you thought was going to stay forever, say, I'm leaving. So are you retaining people at a higher rate? Do you have a decrease in your hiring expenses in that area? And I would say look at like program completion rates. So for those that are actually going back and getting their degree, are they finishing in those areas in the different degree programs that they might be seeking? So those are the three things that I would look at.
Yeah, I read a lot about executive recruitment, specific within healthcare, because you talked a little bit about burnout and the difficulties working in healthcare as a career choice. Very high stakes. People's lives are in your hands. And I think a lot of that from the executive standpoint, or then that middle management, where the level of care and support, an education program is one lever in terms of that benefit to help them with life satisfaction, I guess. But I don't know if you want to comment on that, but I think when I read a lot of that executive burnout, and they're retiring as well, just like the rest of the workforce, getting those skill sets back in, these are years and years of on-the-job training that these folks have.
That's a really interesting question. How do you meet those people in the middle or above? I think one of the things that drives people to burnout is also just feeling like they're stuck and not learning anything new, especially if you've been in the healthcare profession for a long time and you're doing the same thing day in, day out, and you can do it with your eyes shut. People want to stretch their brains. They like learning new things, something that's novel or something that makes them feel very accomplished. And so degree completion matters. And if you could provide those individuals, not necessarily with a degree, because it might not be where they're going, I think that's where something where the employee actually has to have a conversation with their employer and say, hey, what are you looking for? So for example, AI. Maybe this employee is very interested in AI and the organization is like, yes, we would like to know how we could better use it or whatever. And, they could go and take some courses or certification, and that's knowledge they could bring back into the organization. Because not only does it fill a personal question for them, something that they're super interested in learning about, but it comes back to the organization who might be struggling with all the changes and the fast pace that's going on within that. And that's something that our healthcare workforce survey found out as well, as no profession right now is immune from the impacts of AI. And it's just going to keep increasing in healthcare, and employees feel like, I don't even know how to use it. What do I do? And they're going to keep creating more bots, for example, robots. We already know perform operations and all those things. And so people just want to be up with the latest. It's like getting a new phone. You want to have the latest phone because it has all these cool things on it that you could do that you never even imagined. It's the same thing in a job. They want to be able to keep pace with what's going on. And I think that alleviates some of the burnout, quite frankly, with people, when there's nothing worse than being bored and burned out. in the space that you're in.
You mentioned a couple of key things I want to make sure that people hear is that it doesn't have to be a long degree program. It can be some of these shorter courses. And I know, at least for me professionally, going through training that the APPR organization provides for physician recruiters, it was so powerful. And, 3 sections and you take a test, but it was something you could complete it in a matter of months if you wanted to. But I think people go in and they think, I have to be in school for 2 years or 4 years or 8 years. A 10-week course seems pretty manageable when you break that out into your day-to-day.
Absolutely. And especially, I think that's another key thing. And credit for prior learning has, I think, been a great addition to the field of higher education as a whole. I don't think it's taken advantage of enough, but people go and they do things like this. They go and they take these courses, and that's something that they should be able to stack together to show that they have knowledge within a particular area. So if at some point they're interested in actually getting a degree, they can bring that whole portfolio together and show, I already have knowledge in these areas, which then just allows them to complete it. So maybe it doesn't take them 2 years to complete their master's, and maybe it only takes them like less than 12 months because they already have sufficient credit for prior learning. So it's something as well that I think higher education has to do a better job of really instituting and making people aware of.
So how should healthcare organizations rethink and evolve their retention strategies? We've talked about career mobility, upskilling, lifelong learning to really meet the expectations for today's workforce.
I think the big thing that I would probably recommend is organizations need to step back and take a fresh look about what their employees are needing and engage in that dialogue. Take a look across the board. What are their retention numbers? Like, what's the turnover rate within the organization? Is there a particular area that's having a turnover with that? And then once they have done that and have spoken with their employees, get a real understanding out of that, like what would be beneficial to them. So if the younger people, like our survey was saying, are showing, yes, we're looking for upward mobility, we're mapping those pathways because people want to see a path forward. There's nothing worse than staying in a job that you think, I will be stuck here for the rest of my life. I have no other opportunities available to me, but also showing how that particular job might lead to another job that they may not even have thought of. I'll use myself as an example. I was a lawyer. I went into the Army. I never thought I'd end up president of a university. But I was able to take the leadership skills that I learned in the military and bring them in with me into higher education. And that helped me move forward down the road. So being able to kind of show them the possibilities of where they can go by taking their education. Just because you're a nurse doesn't always mean you're going to be a nurse. Like maybe you might be really strong in another area where your nursing background comes in very helpful to you in that area. Faculty members are another great thing. That's another great example for us. Our faculty members are all scholar practitioners. They all actively work in the field, right? So they're bringing in their day-to-day knowledge into the course room with the students. And that is great because like you, when I did my undergrad work, and even when I went to law school, I did a very traditional model. And I had professors who never had practiced. They were researchers. That's what they did. They had written countless books and everything, but they had never stepped foot in a courtroom before, for example. And then when I went back and got my doctorate, it was much different because I was dealing with people who were actually in the field and who said, okay, this is actually how this works. You take this, it goes here, or you think this is how the theory is, but in reality, this isn't how it is. So I think mapping those and showing the application is really great. And I also think that organizations, once they realize, okay, here's the skill sets that we need, helping and looking for organizations, whether they be higher education or maybe certificate-based or whatever, pulling together and sometimes using a platform can be very helpful. There's a lot of partner platforms out there where employees can say, okay, this is what I have available to me. This is what the organization's looking for. And then they can start pursuing that pathway.
Within like a high school, my kids are in high school, they have some career counselors or things like that. I've never really thought about it, but large employers within healthcare, it usually is part of your annual performance review process. What do you want to do in 5 years? But true career counseling or did you know these programs are available? I'm thinking a lot about clinical informatics, these physicians who get involved. You may have to go back and take some other courses to really understand that, or physicians who ultimately want to be the CEO. There's different business coursework that they may not have had during all their training. That career counseling thing's kind of interesting to me. That may be helpful.
That's a great point. And there is an organization that we actually do some partnership with their employees, where we help them in terms of thinking about what is next, where do they want to go and do that. But I think you bring up an excellent point, because if you're a doctor and you want to own your own practice or you want to become CEO, is having an MBA helpful? Even an executive MBA. So you just have basic understanding about what is going on in that field. And I think taking advantage of that is great. And I would encourage other people to do that. That's a great example.
I know we talked about some of the metrics that organizations can use to really track and understand their ROI when they're making these investments. Is there anything else you can think of really, it's tied to retention, potentially productivity, anything else that they should be mindful about?
Well, I would say cost efficiency, not just productivity, but also cost efficiency, because at the end of the day, no money, no mission for any organization. So you want to be saving that money so you can reinvest in the organization itself. So I think that cost efficiency is probably a big one as well.
I was reading this morning, Becker's just released the top jobs in healthcare this morning.
Oh, what did it say? What did it say?
Well, no surprise. And so it's measuring 5 components: future prospects, wage potential, employment, job safety, stability, and work-life balance. That's more than 5, I think. Anyway, nurse practitioner is number 1, second year in a row. Then physician assistant. So not too different there. Then it gets into some of the therapies. So speech language pathologist, respiratory therapist, nurse anesthetist. But CRNAs are what we see on the PracticeLink side. This is such a huge gap right now. The amount of CRNA jobs that are available, it's everywhere. I was looking at actually their salaries last week, and I found jobs in the $275. I found jobs up into the $400s. I can see why it's number 5 on the list. It's shift work. You're scheduled, you go in, you work, you go home. You're not taking a lot of the burden with you. Sometimes you're not even on call. But anyway, I know that was side note to our conversation, but it was interesting to kind of see nurse practitioner again at the top.
Well, what I think is interesting, right? It's all focused in the nursing profession. So whether a nurse anesthetist, whether it's a nurse practitioner, I think what we're seeing is nurses are beginning to play a bigger role in patient health. Even you have the nurse psychiatric who are now stepping in and helping out because of the huge mental and behavioral health issues around there. And I love to see that. I love nurses, and I like to see them take a bigger role in that area and allow my best friends and nurse practitioners. So I am a little biased towards the profession.
Yeah, they do great, meaningful work. And I agree with you 100%. That layer of workforce within healthcare is where we have to see the greatest expansion. I think we are, but we won't survive if we're top heavy focused on love physicians. It takes a long time to grow a physician. So kind of that in between or intermediary, and they have the skill set. They have the skill set to do the things that folks need to do. So, all right, get your crystal ball out. We're going to look ahead. This says 5 to 10 years, but man, it feels like a long time with how fast things are changing and the influence of AI, which we've mentioned throughout. But how do you see the relationship between higher education institutions, employers, and really that workforce ecosystem evolving in the future?
So a couple of ways. One, I think that we're really going to see higher education evolve in a sense that they're going to be talent partners for organizations. So they are going to be really co-designing education with employers as a way to meet employers' talent needs. So I think that's very different than now. I think higher education has really traditionally operated in a bubble where they just simply graduate students and then students go out and find their own jobs and do all that. So I think you're going to see a deeper connection there between the two. I also think that you're going to see that higher education rather than a sponsor, which I guess is what I would say historically what it is, being more co-creators. So we're going to see like more module learning, for example, in that area. And we're going to be continuously updating learning based upon what the workforce needs. So higher education historically hasn't done a great job with that. I think you're going to see that within the next couple of years, it's going to get faster and faster. And I also think that you're going to see that AI is going to help that as well around that cost efficiency, the productivity. I think the third thing is really, you're going to see like the workforce as an ecosystem. It's not just higher ed sitting over here on the left and the workforce is over here on the right. I think you're going to see that higher education is going to be that more intermediary role, where it's trying to bridge the gap, where it's trying to understand how do you translate skills that employers need, like into industry standards, credentials, things like that, that students can take and immediately apply in a modular package. To your point, I don't want to go back to school for 7 years to get my doctorate. So maybe I'll just start off taking these little learnings here and there, and then can I package them all together as I move forward? And then lastly, I think, and we're beginning to see this, we talk about it every year within the industry. You see a lot of noise around it, but not a lot happens. I think an overall shift within the workforce and within higher education around degrees. Like, what does it actually mean? Is it really about credentials that you have, or is it about the skills that you're bringing with you? Because you can have the credentials and not be able to do the job. So you want to see those demonstrable skills in that space. And so I think we're going to see that's really going to be spreading and infiltrating throughout higher ed as a whole.
So Constance, it's inspiring to connect your leadership at Capella with the broader imperative facing employers today, really unlocking that human potential by expanding access to the proper education and development pathways. I thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
Christy, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our discussion today.
What Capella does so well is really creating that flexible, responsive, competency-based learning opportunities, which we mentioned throughout this episode. That really helps us to mirror the talent challenges facing recruiters and executives who must cultivate this career growth while driving organizational results. For those interested in the survey that Constance mentioned throughout this episode, you can find that at www.healthcareworkforcesurvey.com. For our audience of recruiters and executives, we encourage you to consider learning partnerships and educational pathways as a core part of your workforce strategy. Connect with Constance and explore how aligning access to education with talent development can create measurable retention, engagement, and performance outcomes for your teams. As always, we welcome your questions, feedback, and ideas for future episodes. Reach out anytime at plmedia@practicelink.com. My name is Christy Bray. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Workforce Wisdom.